Greetings, everyone. Glad you're joining us today. I'm Pastor Dan. I'm the senior pastor at Hillside Wesleyan Church in Olean, New York. So we're glad to have you with us. Let me begin with this statement. And this statement caused Carl Trueman to author a book. And the name of that book is The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And the statement that provoked him to write this was, "I am a woman trapped in a man's body." See, this expression of oneself, I guess, has become familiar and even coherent to our current generation. But this statement would have been considered gibberish or silly a generation ago. But anyways, much of my material today from this message comes from his book. And so I want to give credit to that. This is not your typical sermon, although I will attempt to throw in a few scriptures and a few questions that originate from my personal thoughts. Most of the rest of it is going to come from the thinking of this other group that lives out there in the world. It's not the Christian worldview, it is a non-Christian worldview. So the difference between a Christian worldview and much of what our worldview is in society these days is the difference between believing there are some absolutes in life, moral absolutes, and whether there are not any moral absolutes. So Christians typically hold on to a worldview that believes in these absolute truths that apply to everyone, right? We think they're true and they're true for everybody. So it's a little bit egotistical, I realize, to say that we know the absolute truth. I get that. It probably would be, to be fair, it'd probably be more accurate to say we believe we know some absolute truth. We believe we know some absolute truths, right? And at the top of that list of absolutes is that Jesus is the man he says he was. He is God's Son. He is God incarnate. He is Savior. So the sermon it kind of comes from the perspective of those who interpret the Bible differently. Not from those people who interpret it more liberally or more openly regarding sexuality and identity. This sermon comes from the point of view that much of society, I think, is taken, and that the Christian worldview is outdated, it's no longer valid, that the Bible isn't true. So yes, this is our second week of our series called Identity Confusion. And I'm planning on squeezing this loaded topic into a 3-week series. And last week we talked about what we believe. And what I mean by we is the general Christian evangelical church population, what we believed for ages, really. Now this week, we're going to talk about what they believe. And next week, we're going to talk more in depth on some scriptures, and I'm really going to make it personal, and this is going to be called What I Believe regarding some of these issues. So, please note, though, that this series is really meant to be viewed and heard in order, and in order, all 3 sermons, and in totality, that you really have to get the whole 3 sermons to get the breadth of this topic. So I'm encouraging you, if you missed last week's sermon, we didn't have church last week because of the ice, to go back on the internet and view the last week's sermon if you haven't already done so. But also, keep in mind that when this series is done after next Sunday, I'm going to combine all 3 sermons into one document. I'm going to try to edit it well, which isn't my strong suit, and to have it available so anybody can just have that at home and return to it and have, again, the whole breadth of this topic. So, again, keep in mind today that what I am preaching represents not necessarily what I believe, except for some scriptures and some questions I'll throw out in the middle of the sermon, but what I believe that this large portion of society believes that doesn't hold to a Christian worldview. Now, some of these thoughts and expressions that they use may not really sit well with you, and I get that. But just remember, John 16:33 says, "I have told you these things that you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Okay? So here we go. This is what I think society, a large portion of society, it's not everybody fits into the same little pocket of thinking, but this is what I believe a large portion of society thinks. So it really shouldn't shock anybody that society has changed their view of themselves and others over time. Changes in technology, philosophy, politics continue to advance what we think and what we believe. And we're going to cover much of these as we talk about those changes today. You know, there's always been people who have struggled with their identity and frankly, their sexuality. There were many, many people over the years who had to stay hid in their closets they were afraid that if they came out, they would not be accepted. Of course, my question is, do people who were in the closet ages ago come close to those who are out of the closet today? But anyways, people feel suppressed and even oppressed by traditionalist views and those with Christian worldviews. Most Christians are homophobic and hate-mongering people. Of course, I would ask if our Christians, family and friends, if that perception of us is true or not true. But anyways, let's look back at a couple of the great minds in history. While great philosophers and psychologists haven't always dictated, of course, what society believes, they often reflect what society was believing at the time. And certainly these great thinkers had influence on what society would believe. Augustine may have been the last great philosopher who held to some absolute truths. He called them external laws. Augustine saw man as an evil being who needed help to overcome his or her inclinations. But most great thinkers since then have not believed that there was this ultimate truth. And they believed ultimately that man was good, but just felt pressure on the society around them to conform, to be what everybody else was, to how these kind of harmful pressures placed on themselves. But when we trace these steps, you begin to see how we have advanced to where we've gotten here, how the train has moved into the station it's currently in. Even in educational systems, they're now teaching that good is merely a personal preference, right? Because if there's no such thing as absolute truth, then it's all about personal preference. Freud has his fingerprints all over society and the sexual identities that people have today. His understanding that our sexual desire is at the heart of what it means to be human is a major factor in one's happiness. We view history now as one long story of oppression, which should have put us on the alert for future discriminations. Because victims are always the heroes, and victimizers are always the villains. Well, I would say, of course, my question would be, while history certainly gives examples of this, I agree. What dangers present themselves by only interpreting history through this mindset? Ultimately, 1 John 2:17 points us to truth. It says, the world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. So back to the world's point of view. The church and its values have been rejected. Thou shalt not is repressive. It's not helpful. The Bible puts constraints on what makes people happy. So yes, personal taste has become truth. Therefore, truth is relative. It's subjective. And the church has been a major force in inhibiting one's true identity. Our identity is formed through our view of ourselves, which gives us the ability to make and remake ourselves as we want to. It's kind of a consumerism mindset at the deepest and most personal level, because nothing is really fixed or permanent now. We have the ability to overcome so many things. With credit cards, we can use plastic to become plastic people recreated by plastic surgery. Yes, we can now separate gender from sex through surgery, through hormones, through modern breakthroughs. Of course, I would question, have we become Play-Doh people to be formed and reformed at will? Is that really what we want to be about? But back to the worldview. Both politics and many institutions of higher learning are actually now deconstructing traditional values. In fact, identity issues such as race and sex are often at the forefront of society's issues and debates. Many families, if we take this further, if things get much worse, I believe we're going to have to make more strict measures. Because kids grow up and they have this moldable identity. And the state might need to be empowered to step in. Because our sexuality is tied to our identity, and families can't be trusted to help kids embrace who they claim they are and who they want to become. And we can't allow that. So we just might need the state to intercede. But I would ask, where does that leave parents who've actually considered it their job to make kids at times do things they don't want to do? It all comes down to Romans 8:5. Those who live according to the flesh have their mindset on what the flesh desires, but those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their mindset on what the Spirit desires. We believe in the Spirit. But back to the worldview would say, the flesh knows best. Fleshly desires and our sexuality are closely tied together. We are letting this provocative genie out of the bottle. It's okay. From porn to the pill, we have made it easy and simple to have sex, to have safe sex, and even change your sex. Of course, I would say, have all these pleasures liberated us? Or have they put us actually in prisons of our own making? But the worldview presses on. This is where we have come, my friends. Sexuality now lies at the heart of our identity in society. Christians' belief in an absolute truth is no longer the common worldview. We see ourselves and the world around us now as raw material to be manipulated and changed at our will. What a glorious thing. And our one's purpose and identity are now a personal choice each of us gets to make. And society will continue to decide what is acceptable and what is unacceptable, and we will move and change as we go. And we believe people need to be affirmed in who they are and the choices people make. Anyone or anything who doesn't affirm what choices we make and who we say we are is actually oppressing society. And we can't allow that. It's killing us. So let me step out of the worldview a minute, actually for the rest of the message. You know, it's really easy to understand when you don't have that core anchor. Christians have the Bible, and we have our absolute truths that we hold to. It's really understandable how you can move continually down this road to end up where we've ended up. I get it. In some ways, I don't fault that worldview. If you take out the Bible and moral absolutes, that is where you're going to end up. Isn't it interesting that today is the Sanctity of Life Sunday, but our questions surrounding life and sex and gender are multiplying? And I believe at the heart of that is this debate that centers around absolute truth versus relative truth. And I admit, being a believer in absolute truth doesn't make it really simple and easy to legislate what society does. It's dangerous to legislate too much morality. Christians have tried that way long ago in history. It didn't work so well. But it's just as dangerous to legislate too little. And we're maybe starting to see some of that too. Because with no moral absolutes, how do you legislate what's right and wrong? But let us not give up hope. Galatians 4:9, right? Let us not become weary in doing good, but for the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. We don't have to give up. And there are reasons to hope. Let me give you a few simple reasons, and then let me give you a couple big reasons, okay? Here's some simple reasons. There are still some things in society that are not accepted anymore. Still now. You think about incest and pedophilia, and all those things are a couple examples of sexuality things that we still claim or hold as wrong. You know, we haven't got over the cliff yet. There's still some right and wrongs out there. And society really can't function without some right and wrongs, right? There'll always be things that society will say, no, this is too harmful. You cannot do those. And deep down, I think still deep down we understand that sex is somewhat sacred. I mean, rape is considered far worse than a slap in the face, as it should be, right? So deep down we know that there are some things that are right and wrong and worse than others, right? And I believe in some ways the pendulum will swing back the other way. Society has a way of going one way and goes too far, then swings back the other way and then goes too far, and it'll swing back the other way. There's reason to hope, my friends. But here's our biggest hope. God will make a change. I mean, you read through the scriptures and the breadth of the Bible, and God only allows things to just wander for so long before he steps in. I don't know if it's going to happen sooner or later. I don't know if it's going to happen by revival or whether Jesus is going to come back. I don't know if it's going to happen in the form of judgment or in the form of mercy. But I've been thinking a lot about this. Well, I've never wanted to be, I'm not a prophet. I'm not I think God's going to do something. God's going to make his presence felt. And I think for us in the church right now, it's time to pick a side. I mean, really pick a side. Now, again, I want to make sure I understand here. I've just labeled generalities here this morning. Very general. Doesn't apply to everybody. There's way more camps than two, right? But when it comes down to it, in a sense, there is. We either as Christians hold truth to the basics of our foundation. Jesus is who he says he is. That being a core. Or we don't. We can't waffle back and forth. We can't decide that absolute truth is good in one case and it's not acceptable in another. We've got to choose. We've got to know where we stand. We're called to be a loving, kind, gracious people. But we're also called to have that firm foundation which we don't waffle from. That is critical for us, my friends. The world is beginning to think differently. If it already hasn't for years, maybe for decades, it's been slowly moving. And the train has arrived in this station. And this is where we're at. So I encourage you. Do you know what you believe? Do you know your foundation? Do you believe in absolute truth? These are the issues that will shape us and decide how the church moves forward and how it survives or thrives in the coming decades. God bless you all. I'm praying for you. I'm thinking of you and hope to see you next week.